I love
Okay,
that you
well,
brought
first
that
of all,
one
I got
up.
to clarify something. Mom brought Storm of the Century so she could finish watching it too. Okay, you were interested in the movie, and you're saying you
No,
brought it for
no,
me.
no,
You
that's not
wanted to
true. That's
finish
not
watching
true.
it.
That's not true.
Hello, and welcome to the premiere episode of the Cup of Tea Critiques podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Chasen, and like always, I'll be joined today by the great team that brings you cupofteacritiques.com. We are super excited to get started on our podcast where we will share our unique perspectives on several different areas in movies and television. At Cup of Tea Critiques, we encourage critical viewing of cinematic presentations so you can decide for yourself if they're your cup of tea. Here on the Cup of Tea Critiques podcast, we will dive even deeper into the productions and subjects that we cover on our website, engaging in conversation and sharing our unique perspectives on each topic. Ready for a deep look with a deep brew? This week's topic, horror or thriller? What makes up the difference? I'm so looking forward to getting to this topic. So without further ado, let's get started. In case you're unaware, Cup of Tea Critiques is a family business, and I'm so happy to introduce my family to you. I'm here with my brother, Chris, my mother, Reba, and my father, Terry. I'm going to go ahead and kick it to Chris because this is a Crumpets article you did for us on the site, and I really enjoyed going through it. I love all the different things you shared about it. So let me go ahead and just kick it to you, and you kind of tell us how you got started with this, and let's get this ball rolling.
Yeah, so I saw Heretic a few weeks ago, which is a for those who don't know, it's an A24 movie starring Hugh Grant, where a couple of um, Mormon missionaries or teenage girls uh, who are going door to door go up to his estate and knock on the door, and he invites them inside, um, and he starts kind of grilling them on their belief system, and it goes in a lot of different directions, but essentially he's trapped them he's trapped them in his mansion, and he's testing their faith and their knowledge of their faith.
We just need to go home.
I won't keep you if you wish to leave. But I want you to choose which door to go through based on your faith.
What does this have to do with us leaving?
Everything.
And I thought it was pretty scary. I thought it was pretty scary, but I did listen to a podcast called the Roger Me podcast, and they described it as more of a thriller than a horror, and I thought that would probably hurt my soul if I directed a horror movie. There's the right thing. Well, it was more of another genre, and so it just got me thinking, what are the differences really? Because I mean, and what is it a failure if you set out to create a horror movie and somebody calls it a great something else? So so I just wanted to talk about the differences between horror and thriller with y'all today.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. I think for those that I feel don't necessarily dive into the genre as a whole, they probably view them both as being merged and one in the same. But your article here actually does a good job of helping us differentiate between the two. And so, is that something you actively thought about, like as part of this process, or do you feel like you discovered that more as you wrote the article? And then, can you also like kind of share some of the things you found?
Yeah, I mean, well, no, a lot of movies are advertised as being a blend of two genres these days, anyway. And in this kind of in this world of trying to make a footprint online, it behooves everybody to just slap as many labels on their thing as they possibly can. And I see stuff all the time that's labeled horror, family, adult, but you're like, well, those don't all mesh. I think you're I think you're trying to game the system here. But I think generally you'll see horror and thriller paired together. But um, I think about some thrillers even in recent years that I liked, or horrors and or horror movies in recent years that I've really liked, and I think there's a pretty distinct difference when you start going into how they try to affect the audience, how they try to make the audience feel, and you know what do they want you to feel when you leave? What do they want you to feel while you're watching it? And and who are they trying to get? Who are they trying to get to? I think they're two actually pretty different audiences. Um, and so the first thing when I asked my friends, what do you think the difference between horror and thriller is, and they immediately just said jump scares. Um, and as we know, jump scares is we do that all the time in our own lives. You hide behind the walls, and sleep out. And that's what they're doing. But in a lot of horror movies, it's like a rhythmic based response. Like, and when you watch enough of them, you start to kind of anticipate it. But there's like a moment of silence, and then they try to get you where you think you release the tension, and then they hit you with a jump scare, something in the background or some very loud horn note or something like that, and they accentuate it like that. And you're not going to see that in a thriller necessarily.
Yeah, I gotta agree, man. I found as I was reading your article, it helped explain to me why I don't watch necessarily the traditional horrors as much. I don't frown on it at all. I just found that I tend to lean towards the thrillers. And you talk about it in here about how it's edge of your seat. Mom and Dad, I attribute my enjoyment of thrillers more because you guys, as we were growing up, you expanded the options that we had because as a kid, you watch whatever action or cartoon it is. And then as you showed us more of dramas and suspense and all those kinds of things, that's what honed in on me realizing that when it comes to being scared, I prefer to be scared in a thriller manner and having that edge of your seat deal. And I don't know if you guys, was that kind of intentional or have you guys found that same thing for yourselves?
Well, for me, Brandon, it was certainly intentional because I wasn't going to watch horror. Okay, I'll be totally clear about that. As I wrote in an email a couple of months ago, when I discovered Chris watching Storm of the Century when he was about 10 years old, I freaked. It was a very, very scary movie. The devil had come to this small town and basically said the only way he would leave is if one of the townspeople gave up their youngest son.
You ask me what I want. No. I want someone to raise and teach. Someone to whom I can pass on all that I've learned and all that I know. Someone who will carry on my work when I can no longer do it myself.
It was a I think it was 3 or 4 part miniseries back in the 90s. And I would not let Chris finish watching that movie, and he got very, very upset with me. And long story short is I've just never been a fan of horror. I've never been a fan of horror. Chris cringes when I say that. But I love suspense, though. I do love suspense. I love a good thrill.
Well, that's where Chris and I share in that, and we both love horror. Matter of fact, whenever I see an advertisement for a horror movie that's upcoming, your mother always says, "You and Chris enjoy."
It's absolutely true.
I feel like every time that we know you two are going to be around, that we know we'll lose some time to the two of you going to the theater to catch one.
Yeah. To me, horror, I'm more psychological horror. I like that more than the blood and guts. I mean, there's a certain amount of blood and gore that's tolerable as far as horror is concerned. But for me, horror is more. I enjoy more of the stories that kind of delve with your mind and possibilities, the what ifs and things like that truly horrify you. Thrillers, I love thrillers in that usually the adrenaline rush where you're trying to anticipate what's going to happen, or there's this constant tension of what's going on, which, yeah, there's subtle difference between that and the kind of tension that you get from something that's more or less in a horror genre.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I think about horror, I mean, Storm of the Century was bad enough, which, to be fair, folks, I did eventually buy the video for Chris so he could see it. So he thought I was a mean mom, and I eventually did buy the video so he could finish this thing, but more power to him. But I do on occasion sit down and watch some of the scary stuff with Terry and Chris. But I have to say, when I saw the girl come through the TV, I was done.
In the ring.
That was it for me. That was it for me.
It killed the whole genre for you,
Chris
huh?
hates it when I say I can't stand horror, but I'm just keeping it real. It's just not my thing.
I love that.
Okay, well, first of all, I had to clarify something. Mom brought Storm of the Century so she could finish watching it too. Okay, you were interested in the movie, and you said you brought it for me.
No,
You
that's not
wanted to
true. That's
finish
not
watching
true.
it.
That's not true.
You
I
wanted
bought
to
it because I
finish
didn't want
watching
you to continue to be mad at me. That's why I bought
You
it.
wanted
And then your dad and I
you wanted
sat down and watched it with you. And you're right. It turned out to be very, very good. It turned out to be very, very good, I have to say.
Exactly. I think the thrillers that were coming to mind for me were, I was thinking Speed, right?
Yeah.
Argo, Argo won the Oscar
Yep.
a few years back. One I heard the other day that just came to mind was Cellular, the one with Chris Evans on the phone, like him basically called. And I feel like thrillers are so often just it's a race against time, basically. Someone's in danger. It's established, that our hero has this long to find somebody or get the villain or defuse the bomb. It's always this race against time. And I feel like horror movies will just put you in this universe where it's a lot of times time isn't really the factor as much as just this inescapable environment that you're in.
Yeah.
Right? And I feel like that's kind of a difference that I would and because of that, thrillers can feel very real world, like a kidnapping feels like a very real thing. A bomb being planted somewhere feels like a very real thing. Horror, it's very abstract. It's ghosts, it's demons, it's just even if it's just a regular human being, they're very strange and they're very isolated. And I think horrors thrive off of this just universe that feels almost separate from ours in a way that thrillers don't.
I love that both you and Dad said some interesting things there, because like when you talked about existing in the universe all by itself, it took me back to 13 Ghosts.
God! I hate it when they do that! What? They wait for you to stick your face right up against the glass, and then they give you a big fat boom. Don't do that!
And I think that might be the last horror movie I really actively signed up for, and I actually really enjoyed it. Matthew Lillard was in that one, and I just found it. I don't know why. I think it's because in general I enjoyed a lot of the things I saw him in, and he's been in a few different movies like that. But in this particular instance, you hit the nail on the head about it existing in a whole different world for me. So I think that's the perfect example I can draw from that. Dad also brought up another piece that you touch on in this article as well, Chris, is that there's subgenres within the horror genre, because we talked about horror versus thriller, and then Dad said psychological thriller, and it just, Mom, when you brought up The Ring, I thought of The Ring as more of a psychological thriller. Because to your point, when it came out of the TV, that's put it in its own universe or whatever to stick with the horror genre itself. But prior to that, we're kind of on the edge of our seat because we understand that we had so many days before the worst was supposed to happen. So that's where I think that hits exactly where Dad's talking about. And I don't know, it helps me to understand that there are still pieces within the horror genre that I can still attach to and not just say I blatantly ignore this. I don't know. Somebody take over on this because that's all the things that are going through my head right now.
To be fair, the plot for The Ring went away with me when she came out of the television. I don't even know what that movie was about anymore. Once she came out of the television, that was it. I left the room.
Yeah.
I left the room.
In terms of psychological horror, one of the classic ones for me is Nightmare on Elm Street, because here you had someone invading someone's dreams. It wasn't so much the gore of it being a horror, but it's the fact that someone could actually invade your psyche while you're asleep. Now, that's an example of what I would consider psychological horror that piques my interest.
So, two quick things. Mom, you talked about the way you lost it with the with the Ring, and you could do with my one of my college classmates and I, the way we got around that was we just said we just turned the TV against the wall at night. That way, if she came out, she'd still be stuck. That's how we managed to defeat that movie. But separately too, Dad, you brought up Friday the 13th, and I'm thinking about one thing Chris talked about too with the blood aspect of horror versus thriller, and they really get me in that scene where they kill the woman in the bed and you got this geyser of blood going up. And Chris, I'll throw it to anybody here. The whole idea of blood when it comes to these movies, what do you guys think on that? I think Chris touched on that really well, because in that case, it's just a mess of blood everywhere. Whereas with thrillers, it seems like, Chris, to your point in the article, the blood has a lot more to do with the characters than it does to necessarily like just being a big explosion or something.
I think a lot of times in thrillers, the blood is the blood, the gore, the injuries. It's directly related to shrinking the odds of the main character being able to succeed. I mean, to take it to TV, like 24, and Jack Bauer gets shot in the arm. Well, it's gonna be a lot harder to save the day with a bullet in your arm. So it's generally where I think there's a lot of scenes in thrillers where you see the main character nursing an injury that they have, or nursing an injury that somebody they're trying to protect got. And so, and it might, they some of them are grosser than others. Some of them, it depends on however the filmmaker chooses to depict it. But it's usually, okay, what are they gonna do now? What is John McClane gonna do now that his feet are all cut up by all this glass, right?
Yeah.
And in horror, the blood just it seems it's just to appeal to audience members who really love horror movies. And there's just some people who love the blood and guts of it all. They like the effects, they like that, and so what you're seeing on screen doesn't really have anything to do with the plot. It's just appealing to the people watching the movie itself. And it makes me think, some people, I don't relate necessarily, even though I like horror, but some people just like blood. When I worked I worked at a COVID testing site, and one of the nurses there followed this account that showed like these kind of grisly injuries that people had from like car accidents and stuff like that. And she showed it to somebody else who also followed the same account, and it was just like, I just can't really relate to that. But some people like the blood and guts of it all. It doesn't bother them. And I think that's what a lot of what you see in horror, the blood isn't necessarily impacting the story, it's just appealing to the audience.
Our aesthetic tastes vary.
For sure, it can make for a memorable scene. I mean, to the point I think
It
Brandon
did.
brought up. Nightmare on Elm Street, he gets sucked through a bed, and then you just see more blood than is probably in the human body.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
Going through the ceiling. And I just feel like in a thriller, you wouldn't see something like that. It'd just be like, oh, it would take you out of, because you're primed for a real world story when you're watching a thriller. So you would see something like that and you'd be like, that's ridiculous. But in the horror movie, you go for it. So, yeah.
I love that you brought that up, Chris, because another thing you talk about in your article is weaponry. And I think that lends right into the blood argument because I think of a movie like Psycho, where we know that the weapon is a knife and whatnot. And then you think about Texas Chainsaw Massacre, it's in the name. We all know what Freddy uses with the claws. Like there's obviously a weapon aspect to it and what's realistic versus unrealistic. But growing up, I viewed Psycho as a horror movie. And now it sounds like it's actually more nuanced than that. So is it possible that a horror movie can still use regular weapons, you think? Or do you think it usually has to do something a little bit extra?
Oh no, I think there's crossover for sure. And I think I kind of hinted at this in my article that the benefit to having this kind of abstract world and fighting fighting the evil with these kind of unorthodox weapons is you don't have to like pay for real weapons.
I saw that.
Yeah, I mean, how do we fit the Exorcist in the budget? Well, just put a Bible in there. they're gonna fight it with the Bible. But I think there's crossover for sure. And I mean, there's to the point. I think there's something a little more frightening about a stabbing than say a shooting, right? Like there's like a personal aspect to it. There's a proximity to the person you're
That's a good point, yeah.
So watching someone do that is probably scarier than say the military violence you might see in a movie or something like that.
Good point.
As I read your article, Chris, I thought a lot about how horror and thriller get conflated. And I myself use them interchangeably, and I wonder if that's wrong. And I was wondering, to what degree should we, I mean, is it fair to slice and dice, or is it okay to conflate? Or, I mean, how should we, I'm trying to think about how to use this in our writing and everyday speech. Should we be correct? Should we speak correctly about what's a horror and what's a thriller in our writing and in our speech, or is it okay to use the two as if they're one and the same?
It's funny you chose.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say to Mom, I think it's funny that she originally chose to say slice and dice on this subject matter. But that being said,
yeah, okay.
A response to what you were saying, though, Mom, I think goes into another aspect to this that I thought that you and Dad really can kind of comment on. I wonder if part of that might be that horror as a genre itself has transformed from what it was in the past, when all of the classic ones that came out were in the past, versus what we know of today. So can you maybe speak to that, and maybe that actually leads us to some of the answers right now?
Well, I think, I'm sorry, was that to Chris, or is it okay if I just comment real quick?
That was both to you and Dad, actually.
Okay, I think here the big thing for me with horror, like I said, I don't care much for the blood and guts. I really don't. For me, the story has to say something, and I find with a lot of the older films, there wasn't really a statement being made. There were no strong themes. What I like about the present day stuff is the story is having something to say. And I think that should be the point of writing a story, as opposed to just presenting something for shock value. So, for example, your dad spoke earlier about psychological thrillers. I think about Alfred Hitchcock, who was a genius a genius in psychological thrillers, The Birds and such. So I think there were a few in the past that were really good, but for the most part, I think the rest of it was blood and guts and didn't really have a lot to say.
I find it very interesting that I've said psychological horror, and both of you said psychological thriller in reference to me saying, describing psychological horror.
See what I mean? I conflate the two. Chris, correct me. Am I wrong here? Fix me,
No,
Chris.
I think it's I really think it's you can tell. I think it's a lot related to what is this movie going for, and I think you can kind of get that from like how do they market this. That's kind of a big thing. I mean, I would almost say you could tell from just the tone of voice of the voiceover narrator in the trailer. Is he doing that really deep thing you hear with horror movies all the time?
Mm-hmm.
Is he? I mean, just how do they even cut up that 2 minutes? Like, how are they wanting you to? Who are they trying to entice? Because those are they completely different crowds.
Yeah.
And another thing I mentioned, thrillers are probably going to have like an A-list actor in there. You know,
he beat me to it. Go ahead, bro.
Argo had Ben Affleck, Speed, that I mentioned earlier, had Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock, and they have these recognizable faces. And a lot of horror movies, it's a budget restriction or just A-listers don't want to do them. A lot of them have lesser known actors because you're trying to get in under the budget, or maybe get the bigger name actors and actresses don't feel like it's a good enough use of their talent. So
I feel like
interesting.
Oftentimes, though,
I'm sorry.
I'll be real quick. To Chris's point, I think that what you notice is that in a lot more horror films, they seem to be more like a jumping off to careers or like somebody very early getting into the cinematic world.
That's exactly what I was about to say, Brandon.
Yeah, go for it, Dad.
No, that's exactly what I was about to say, is that it's funny how many people that have become quote unquote A-list actors start out in the horror or thriller genre, or more so horror. I think it depends on how you feel about what an A-list actor is described as, but Jamie Lee Curtis, to name one, started out in the horror genre for the most part, and several others. But yeah, I think it's interesting how many of them have kind of early in their careers gone into horror and then become a more well-known actor.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. I mean, like, to name some more actors like Freddie Prinze Jr., when he went his foray with I think it was him and Sarah Michelle Gellar, who eventually ended up married, but they did I Know What You Did Last Summer and things like that. So Jessica Biel with Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So it's funny because we've seen them in a lot of other things since then, but it's like their first time on the big screen did seem to be popping off in some sort of horror movie.
Yeah. Matthew Lillard, as you mentioned earlier.
Yep. Yes, exactly. I think I want to go with one last thing here because we're running short on time now. I want to say, after this discussion, Dad, it's funny you pointed out how you did say psychological horror. Mom and I said psychological thriller, so it kind of gives the answer to this question. But at the conclusion of all this, exactly explain within the context of this conversation, what is your cup of tea when it comes to horror?
Horror. I like the horror movies that kind of play with your mind. And as Chris pointed out, you're in this otherworldly sort of situation. It really, really piques my interest when a horror movie is not about someone getting their throat slashed or something like that, but more how it affects the quote unquote victims or the people in the movie psychologically. How are we going to deal with this? And how it stretches the realm of possibility. It stretches your thinking. That's what I really like about a good horror movie is one that stretches your thinking.
What's your favorite?
My favorite one? Oh, that's hard to say. I have a few that are at the top of the list. Like I said, Nightmare on Elm Street, because it was one of the early ones that dealt with this whole notion of the horror coming into your mind more so than the actual people being slashed and murdered. And another one, and I can't remember. Chris and I went to see it. A Cabin in the Woods, is that it?
I remember.
Yeah, that was another one that I thought was really good because it was not your conventional horror movie.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, I think self-aware horror movies, are the ones uh that probably shine through. I think about, my favorite is Psycho. Um, but I also think about what you mentioned earlier, 13 Ghosts. There's um it's a very goofy horror movie where they kind of reference some of the things we were talking about, like the idea of horror movies being in this self-contained world, or this other world, having this otherworldly effect. This is all occurring in the basement of one house, and if you venture 5 minutes that way, it's real life again, right? And Matthew Lillard even says something to that effect as he's talking to the babysitter, and she's going, or the nanny, and she's like, what, this is all happening in this basement? And he's like, what is it with you people? If this was next door, I wouldn't give a crap. So, I think especially horror movies that can kind of wear different hats, they can like make you laugh here and there. They can come up with a line. Psycho has a line, a boy's best friend is his mother. Like they'll have something memorable about them. The Ring has the girl going through the TV. Like, I think just the ones that can kind of have a moment or a phrase that is just becomes iconic. And I think I like Psycho because it has all that. It has the shower scene. It has the quotes. It has the surprise ending that they set up so well. I actually knew the ending, and when I watched it, I forgot it because it was so well executed. So yeah.
And then to add one more, probably would be classic horror, I guess, maybe, is The Birds, the Alfred Hitchcock one, because that is another thing you think about, the possibility of birds turning on humans, and you're outnumbered. How in the world do you deal with something like that? And then at the very end, things change and they quote unquote go back to normal, but will you ever be normal again? Will you always look over your shoulder as what happened? Why did this happen? Will it happen again?
Good point. Good point. What about Mom? What do you got for us?
My favorite one was Michael Jackson's Thriller.
That's interesting. That is a short film and a short horror film.
Yeah, you're talking about the video.
Good one, Mom.
So yeah, Michael Jackson's Thriller was my favorite. I'll add another one. I thought Storm of the Century was very good. Having said that, I would never watch it again. I watched it once. It was one and done with that one.
I admit I enjoyed Storm of the Century. Thriller. I think that was a good call out, Mom, because that was a short film that was pretty well done too, and is a benchmark of how music videos get measured even today. So 13 Ghosts is my favorite because it was fun, and like, since I don't dive into that aspect of the horror genre very much, that's what I kind of lean into. I also remember, and I won't call it a good one, but Joyride was another one that I remember. I laughed along with it a lot. Maybe that's how not serious I took the movie, but I remember watching that. And then going through all of this, I'll say like a psychological thriller as opposed to a psychological horror for myself. Taking Lives. Taking Lives was another one that kept me on the edge of my seat that I really enjoyed.
You're kidding me.
We'll have undercover officers watching you all the time.
The best surveillance team.
We're still talking about the same guy who smashes in people's faces and cuts off their hands, right? C'est ça?
So that's where I would say I that would be more of my cup of tea. I think movies like Taking Lives are definitely ones that I like to jump into a lot more. But overall, if it's going to be something horror I jump into, I hope it's something that's, maybe got some boo scary with a little bit of fun to it. Well, that's going to wrap up our first edition of the Cup of Tea Critiques podcast. We hope you enjoyed listening as much as we enjoyed sharing today's conversation. Honestly, we could go on and on like we do at our dinner table, but we look forward to you joining us again next week for another great discussion. You can stay in the loop on all things COTC by subscribing on our website at cupofteacritiques.com. You can also find us on Facebook, check out our Instagram at Cup of Tea Critiques, and on Letterboxd at COT Critiques. For Reba, Terry, and Chris, I'm Brandon. We'll see you next week for another deep look with the Deep Brew.